fortune lies beyond the stars, those dazzling heights too vast to climb. I got so high to fall so far, but I found heaven as love swept low, my heart beating, my soul breathing. I found my life when I laid it down, upward falling, spirit soaring. I touched the sky when my knees hit the ground. What treasure waits within your scars? This gift of freedom gold can't buy. I bought the world and sold my heart. You traded heaven to have me again. My heart beating, my soul breathing. I found my life when I laid it down, upward falling, spirit soaring. I touched the sky when my knees hit the ground. Find me here at your feet again. Everything I am, reaching out, I surrender. Come sweep me up in love again, and my soul will dance on the wings of forever. Find me here at your feet again. Everything I am, reaching out, I surrender. Come sweep me up in your love again, and my soul will dance on the wings of forever. My heart beating, my soul breathing. I found a life when I laid it down, upward falling, spirit soaring. I touched the sky when my knees hit the ground. My heart beating, my soul breathing. I found my life when I laid it down, upward falling, spirit soaring. I touched the sky when my knees hit the ground. Find me here at your feet again. Everything I am, reaching out, I surrender. Come sweep me up in your love again, and my soul will dance on the wings of forever. Upward falling, spirit soaring. I touch the sky when my knees hit the ground.
Amen.
Michelle, thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. So glad that you are here on this brisk spring morning. So as we continue our worship today, we are continuing with our sermon series from the Sermon on the Mount. The story of Jesus sitting down with his disciples and those who began to follow him and coming in closer and closer. They were picking up bits and pieces of what he was saying, and the crowds began to gather. Now, we get to this part of the sermon today where we have been through the Beatitudes, we have been through some of the instruction, we have been through the warnings, and now we get to a little bit different section of the sermon. It's getting close to wrapping up his time on the mountainside with the crowds and with the disciples, but he has some interesting words, and he talks a little bit about sight. I have a friend who I called recently because I was asking him, remind me of what you told me years ago about what you do and how eyes matter. So my friend is the head of a security department, and he works in a high-rise in a downtown skyscraper building. And he started off as one of the people who would sort of walk the beat around the building, the ground floor, the food court area, the shopping area, and then the offices above. And so he knows this building, and he knows downtown. And as major events have come into the city, like an all-star game and a Super Bowl, he's been in on the planning sessions for how to mitigate security threats and things like that. And he was telling me once about his job, and I said, so what are you looking for? He would tell me about how his group stopped some people and prevented some things from happening and some threats that were really credible threats. And I said, well, how do you do that? And he said, well, sometimes it comes from intel, from law enforcement, but other times we are just always watching very carefully. We're watching people, we're looking for any suspicious behavior, we're looking for people that are lingering and lurking. He said, we catch people all the time taking pictures of our cameras and where they are in strategic locations. And he said, and every once in a while, we find somebody doing something suspicious and we bring them in to our office. And we sit them down and we ask them some questions. And I said, well, is this like an interrogation? And he said, well, it's not that intense, but we're just usually asking questions like, tell us who you are. Tell us why you're here today. We noticed you were taking some pictures. Can you tell us why? Is there anybody else with you? What business do you have here? That kind of thing. And he said, we always watch their eyes. And I said, well, what can you learn from their eyes? He said, well, the interesting thing is that our eyes are very much tied into the rest of our limbic systems in our brains. And so we often have involuntary things that we do with our eyes when we are telling the truth, when we are lying, and especially when we are nervous. So he said, we have a natural kind of smile. And when we smile, we may have a little bit of pull in our eyes, and we get a little bit squinty. And we talked about this back in January when we were talking about sort of natural facial expressions. But he said, there's a very different thing that our eyes do when we are happy and when we are nervous. He said, one of the case studies that we have is we pulled a guy in, and we found out that he was actually going to commit a pretty awful crime, but we prevented that from happening because we pulled him aside and we had this conversation, and he was laughing and smiling and very jovial with us. But he said, we used that video recording as a training video today, and we take two sections of his face. We take from the bridge of his nose up and another one where we cut away and we do a bottom screen. And we have all of our students watch the bottom screen, and they'll see smiling and joyfulness and sort of a jovial kind of personality. And he said, but if you just watch the other screen of just the eye movements, he said, you'll see that his eyes very much express apprehension, anxiety, and nervousness. And he said, when we watched his eyes, we knew that he was up to something and he was lying. And we turned him over to law enforcement, and sure enough, some sort of plot was foiled in the process. Our eyes tell us a lot. In this year where we have been wearing masks, I think all of us have gotten better about reading people's eyes. We'd become dependent on trusting people's facial expressions with the majority of their face, and now we only get to look at maybe a third or a quarter of our faces, and we've been able to read eyes better, haven't we? I mean, don't you remember at the beginning of the pandemic when we look at somebody and somebody would say, oh, I'm smiling underneath this mask. But nowadays, you look at people and we're better, I think, at reading eyes. I don't even know that we would say that we recognize this, but if you think about it, we all have gotten more accustomed to doing that. And I bring all this up because this is the thing that Jesus focuses on for two different passages of Scripture in the end of the Sermon on the Mount. And so I want to read those to you now. The first one comes to us from Matthew in the 6th chapter. This is near the end, and this is verses 22 through 23. Jesus says to all who are gathered, the eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? And now skipping ahead to the next chapter in 7, verses 1 through 5. Do not judge so that you may not be judged. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged. And the measure you give will be the measure you get. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your neighbor, let me take the speck out of your eye, while the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So if you have been reading in the book that we've been studying as a church, the Sermon on the Mount book by Amy Jill Levine, you'll notice that you may remember in today's chapter or this week's reading that she talks about the different way that in the ancient world they understood how the eye worked. And numerous commentaries, if you read from this passage of Scripture, will say the same thing. You see, nowadays we know that our eyes receive light coming into them. They're bouncing off of objects, and we see the objects, and everything is because of the light that comes into our eyes. But in Jesus' day, the belief was really quite the opposite, that it was light that we carried within us, and when we saw something, we put light out on that thing that we were visualizing or that we were seeing. And so when Jesus talks about if you have that light within you and you share that through what you look at, that is different than if you have no light within you and only darkness pours forth from you. Now, I think, scientifically, biologically, it's inaccurate. But metaphorically and theologically, I think that Jesus is saying something that is worth taking note of. He's basically saying this, if you think about it. The things that you fix your gaze on are the things that you put your light on. The things that you pay attention to are the things that are going to have your light shine on them. The things that you choose to stare at, to occupy your attention, are the things where you are going to put forth the things from within you. So, put another way, we put our attention on the things that we are giving our priority to. And that just makes sense. So the question is then, are we putting our priorities in the right place? Or are we staring at the right things? If we are letting our light shine on the things that we give our attention to, what are we putting our attention on? What are we giving our attention to? A little over a year ago, I had one of those moments that was a little bit humbling to me. It was one of those signs that I'm getting a little bit older. Now, some of you were sharing this morning how you're going to have some upcoming surgeries, and it's part of getting older, and I understand that because, I don't know, some signs in my own life are telling me that I've peaked, which causes me great concern. But one of the things that happened about a year ago was that I went in to get my eyes checked, and the doctor looked at me when he pulled the apparatus away from my face. He said, "Well, it's time." And I said, "For a new prescription?" And he said, "For bifocals." Now, bifocals, I thought that might be coming. I was starting to take off my glasses when I was doing reading. If I was going to have a conversation up close or look at the computer screen for a long period of time, I was regularly whipping my glasses off of my face because I was starting to get headaches. But I was vain enough, or at least I didn't want to believe that it was time to get bifocal lenses on my eyes. But sure enough, went in, needed them, got them. Although, of course, now they don't call them bifocals, they call them progressive lenses, right? Progressive because it doesn't have a nice solid line across the middle. And I've convinced myself that progressives are a nice name for them, right? Progressive, I'm a progressive guy. I should need progressive lenses, right? So this is what I have now, progressive lenses. I got them, and immediately I put them on in the doctor's office and thought, I hate this. Because it's hard to get adjusted to. And most of you who wear glasses, who have reached a certain age, know exactly what I'm talking about. Well, I didn't like them. It took a long time to get used to them. And the first way that I knew that is I walked outside. I was walking to my car. I completely missed the curb. And I rolled my ankle. And I almost went back in to take them back. The way that transition, or rather progressive lenses and bifocals work, as you know, is that they work only because the place where you are looking at the moment is the part that comes into focus. And you can't fix your eyes straight ahead and see below you to catch a curb. You've got to look down to see the curb. It changes the way that we walk around, go over stairs, drive our cars, look at things up close and far away. Now you're moving your head up and down, or at least moving your eyeballs up and down to see what comes into focus. And as I was thinking about these progressive lenses, it's a lot like what Jesus was saying. The problem is that for many of us, the things that we have relegated to our peripheral vision are the things that we should have straight ahead of us. But we miss them, and we don't always recognize it until we trip over them. Curbs, stairs, family, critical relationships, practicing our faith. All of these things that we know, if we say, what are the most important things in your life? We'll say, well, it's those kinds of things. It's our family. It's our friendships. It's our professional lives. It's our faith life. It's the betterment of society. It's working for peace and justice in the world. It's serving my neighbors and people who are less fortunate, and on and on and on. And yet, how many of us would say that those are the things that are front and center in our lives? Those are the things that we fix our gaze on each and every day. Or how many of us would say, in all honesty, those are the things that have fallen by our peripheral vision. They're a little bit out of focus, or they tend to drift out of focus regularly. And so instead, we fill our lives with things that Jesus warns us about. We fill our lives with temptations, vices, wanting more, the accumulation of things. It's interesting that when Jesus talks about our vision and the things that we cast our light onto because we are looking at them, it follows a passage that he talks about money. You can make the conclusion that this is a continuation of his talk about money and about giving generously and about giving for all of the right reasons and not to boost ourselves up, but to give out of love and out of joy and out of a need or others' needs. But Jesus is talking about those things that we put in the foreground when really those are the things that should be off to the side or really not visible to us at all. So do we keep wanting more? Do we keep coveting what others have? Do we keep lusting after other people who are not our partners? You know, these are the things that often go front and center in our lives, while the things that are most important get caught only in our peripheral vision. Jesus then goes on to talk about judgment. And while it's normal to have judgment in our lives, it's part of how we differentiate between right and wrong. It's how we say that this person acted appropriately and this person didn't. Or here is a time when someone I love, or maybe my child or myself, did something right, or these are times when I did things wrong. It's not that we don't judge, it's that we are not trying to practice judgmentalism, right? It's not saying I am better because this person stumbled, but we do see right and wrong, so we do judge. But Jesus is saying, but like this other thing, like the other thing that he says about our vision, he says that sometimes we choose to focus on the wrong thing. And so we are looking for the faults in others, we are looking for the specks in their eye, and we have failed to recognize the fact that we have a log in our own eye. Well, what in the world is he talking about? I think it's just a continuation of this same preaching on vision. He's saying if you are seeing the speck in your neighbor's eye, then you are not focused on the right things. If you are seeing the speck in your neighbor's eye, you are seeing their faults. You are looking for their shortcomings. And instead, you should be trying to share your light with them. But instead, what is coming out of your vision field is only darkness, because you are looking at them overly critically. And you are not seeing them as a child of God, but you are seeing them as someone to be judged so that you can feel better about yourself. But in doing so, you have not only been looking at the wrong thing, but you have failed to notice that you have a gigantic log in your own eye. And it's only obscuring your vision field further. So what does Jesus want us to be about? What are the kinds of things that we should be really watching for? Well, I think we go back to the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. He's looking at the meek, the poor in spirit, the mourning, and the grieving. He's looking at those who are struggling and suffering. If you think about what Jesus does, he takes all of the people and the issues that society has failed to see or chosen to avoid seeing, and he takes them from the background and he puts them in his foreground of vision. I mean, think about it. Jesus is doing ministry with people that everybody else would just as soon pretend don't exist. People living in leper colonies. People struggling because they have been shamed or ostracized or judged right out of the regular circles of society. He spends his time putting prostitutes in the foreground, lepers in the foreground, people with disabilities in the foreground. He takes people like tax collectors, Roman soldiers, and others, and he takes everybody that everybody doesn't want to concern themselves with, and he says, you are the ones that I am placing in the center of my field of vision. You are the ones that I am going to share this light with. Everybody else has offered you darkness. Everybody else has cast you aside. I am going to put you in the foreground. So if we want to know how Jesus is calling us to live and to see and to prioritize who we are putting in our field of vision, then it should be obviously the things that are most important to us, but it also should be the people that are most important to Jesus. And that's hard for us to do because we know that it's right, but we don't always act on it. We say, I know that my family is important. I know that my faith is important. I know that working for justice and equality is important. I know that people who are suffering are important. I know that the sick and the grieving are important. And I'll get to them when I have time. And that's why the priority piece is so important. Where our priorities are, we will cast our light. They will be the focus of our vision. But as you take account of the things that are before you, how many of those things are the things that Jesus would say, yes, that's what's most important? That's where your vision needs to be. Those are the individuals with whom you should share and cast your light. I think in all honesty, that's something that we struggle with. I also think that Jesus' Sermon on the Mount is the greatest hits of the things that we struggle with. What we are called to be. What we aspire to be. We've been now in this season of Lent. We're past the halfway point. We're coming down the home stretch. Next weekend is Palm Sunday. And the Sunday after that is Easter. It's a wonderful thing. But remember that the season of Lent is a great season, a wonderful opportunity in the church year to take stock in where we are. How healthy are we spiritually at this time? Where are we on this spiritual walk with Jesus? What things need to be tuned up? What things need to be replaced? Where should our vision be? Jesus has a vision for bringing about God's kingdom here on earth. It's working for the best of what we can be. And he gives us this image again of what it looks like when we see the world as he does. When we share our light with those who are suffering or those who are cast aside. And when we do that, we begin to elevate one another. We begin to see the world as he does. We begin to work for a better kind of society, a more peaceful and just world, a world that embraces God's love for all of humankind and says that we all have a place at Christ's table. In these remaining days of Lent, just be thinking a little bit about where your priorities are. Maybe it starts with looking back over your day. How did I spend my day? Maybe it's taking account of what's on your calendar. How have I been using my time? Maybe it's looking at how you have been sharing your energy and your financial resources. Maybe it's how you are caring for yourself and others. Maybe it's how much time you are spending in prayer or in communion with God. But all of these things are about where we spend the light that we have. And Jesus invites us to fix our gaze on him, to walk as he does, to see the world as he does. And as the song that we sang earlier reminds us, maybe we're closest to heaven. Maybe we touch the sky when our knees hit the ground. In prayer, our feet hit the ground, our hands are at work, we're loving, we're praying, we're serving, we're seeing the world's eyes, or seeing the world through the eyes of Jesus.
Thanks again for being here with us for worship. We're glad that you joined us for S3. If you'd like to know more about the church, discipleship opportunities, or ways that you can serve, be sure to click on one of the links below. Also, if you're interested in supporting the church beyond your prayers and your presence, we hope that you'll consider giving financially as well, and you can find that link on our page as well. Thank you for being here. Have a great week.